Millionaire comes home early, and cannot believe what he sees. The hum of the jet engines faded behind him as Nathan Carter stepped into the warm California breeze. It was barely past 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun filtered through scattered clouds over Palo Alto. He had not planned to be back so soon. The Education Tech Summit in Chicago had been cancelled at the last minute due to a security breach at the venue. Rather than inform anyone, Nathan saw it as a rare opportunity to disconnect. He booked an early flight, left his assistant a vague voicemail about needing to clear his head, and decided to surprise Claire. Their house stood quietly at the end of a residential cul-de-sac lined with well-trimmed trees and elegant brick driveways. It was modern, spacious, yet comfortable, a reflection of the life they had built together. Nathan parked his rental and walked up the steps with a bag over his shoulder and a bottle of red wine tucked under his arm, the kind Claire liked on quiet nights. He imagined her reaction, surprise, then laughter, and maybe even a spontaneous dinner by the fireplace. After all, surprises were rare in their routine-filled lives. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Silence. No music, no kitchen noise, no light conversation on a call, just the soft buzz of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wood floors adjusting to the late summer heat. Nathan frowned. Claire's car was in the driveway. She should be home. He took a few steps in, set the wine on the marble countertop, and looked around. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. The house was tidy, as always. But then he noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere, pillows on the couch slightly out of place, a coffee cup resting on the edge of the staircase, and a scent in the air that was unfamiliar. Not perfume or food. Paper. Ink. Nathan followed the scent to the kitchen table. There, atop a neat leather portfolio, was a stack of documents. He paused. Claire never left work papers lying around, especially not in shared spaces. He leaned in. The top page bore the letterhead of Carter Learning Systems, his company. He pulled out a chair and sat down, flipping through the pages. His heart began to race as the words registered. Project Horizon, Preliminary Launch Framework, in association with Nathan Carter. It was his name, his title, even his signature at the bottom of one page, but he had never seen these documents before. He stared at the printed schedule attached, Phase 1 launch date, preliminary pitch to investors, followed by a board-level presentation, all within the next 2 weeks. He knew nothing about this. Nothing. His hands gripped the edge of the table as he searched the pages for clues. The second folder was marked, Lucas Jennings, Development Drafts. Lucas. Of course. Lucas Jennings had been by Nathan's side for nearly a decade, head of project development, co-founder in all but name, and a close family friend. It was no secret that Lucas had been eager to push new ideas, and Nathan had encouraged him to think boldly. But this was different. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Claire. Running errands. Be home soon. Love you. Nathan stared at the message for a moment, then back at the documents. Why were these papers here? Why had no one informed him about this project? And most importantly, why was Lucas using his name, and forging his approval? He stood abruptly, walked to the sink, and splashed cold water on his face. The questions echoed louder now. Was it a mistake? A miscommunication? Or something more deliberate? He paced the kitchen slowly. Claire must have seen these documents. Had she printed them? Was she involved? Or had Lucas left them here by accident? Every possibility felt like a fracture in the foundation he had taken for granted. A sudden noise, the faint click of a door upstairs. Nathan froze. He waited, listening, but the sound didn't come again. He climbed the stairs quietly, one step at a time, his heartbeat loud in his ears. The master bedroom door was slightly ajar. Inside, everything was in order. He stepped inside and looked around. Nothing seemed off, until he spotted a closed drawer on Claire's side of the desk that was never locked before. He tested the handle. Locked. He stood there for a long moment, the silence thick around him. There was a new layer of uncertainty in the air, one he couldn't define yet. But it was there. Something was happening, and he was clearly not supposed to be home to see it. He returned downstairs and sat at the kitchen table again, this time more deliberately. He read every page of the project drafts, every line, every proposed feature. It was brilliant. Ambitious. Revolutionary, even. A learning platform that blended AI-powered tutoring with immersive classroom simulations. Exactly the kind of project that could redefine the company's future. But he had been left out. And now he was back early, a day too soon, perhaps, and the mask of normalcy was cracking. Nathan leaned back in the chair and looked around the room once more, as if seeing it for the first time. This house, this life, this company, everything he had built, suddenly felt like it was shifting under his feet. And he had no idea where the ground would settle. Nathan sat at his desk early the next morning, the half-empty coffee mug beside him long since gone cold. The quiet of the home office, usually a sanctuary of clarity, now buzzed with unease. The documents from the night before were spread out in front of him. He had spent hours dissecting every line, every signature, every project reference. It wasn't just the shock of being excluded, it was the uncanny precision with which everything had been coordinated. His name wasn't just mentioned in passing. It was embedded in the core of the proposal, stamped onto financial projections, used as leverage in communications with external partners. There was a detail that hadn't registered the night before, a meeting confirmation email, printed and stapled to the back of one of the drafts. The header read, Investor Strategy Brief, hosted by Nathan Carter. The location, the company's San Francisco office. The date, today. The time, 10 o'clock in the morning. Nathan glanced at the clock on the wall. It was a few minutes past 8. Without overthinking, he changed into a crisp navy blazer, gathered the documents into a neutral leather folder, and left a brief note on the kitchen counter for Claire. He didn't expect a confrontation yet, not until he knew more. What he needed now was clarity. Context. Answers. The drive to the office was shorter than usual. Traffic seemed to part for him, as if the city itself sensed his urgency. The building, a sleek glass structure tucked between two tech giants, still felt like a triumph every time he saw it. He had started this company in a rented classroom with borrowed furniture and 2 employees. Now it was a pillar of modern education tools, employing hundreds and reaching schools nationwide. Inside, the reception area buzzed with the low murmur of early arrivals. Nathan stepped through the main doors, greeting a few familiar faces with nods but not stopping to engage. He didn't want to raise suspicion yet. Let them think he was here for the meeting they all believed he had scheduled. He took the elevator to the executive floor and walked into the conference room without announcing himself. The room was already partially filled, 3 junior executives he recognized from the development team, an external consultant who worked on investor relations, and 2 individuals he had never seen before, both impeccably dressed and clearly international. Lucas was not there yet. Nathan, said one of the development leads, surprised. We didn't think you'd be joining us in person today. Nathan offered a polite but unreadable smile. Change of plans. The consultant quickly rose from her seat. We've prepared the materials assuming you join via call, but everything is ready for your walkthrough. The investors. Investors, he interrupted. She hesitated. Yes. From Vanguard East Holdings. They've expressed strong interest in the Horizon Initiative. Nathan turned toward the 2 suited men. Welcome, he said coolly. Let's wait for the rest of the team before we begin. He took the seat at the head of the table. It wasn't about asserting dominance, it was about reclaiming his place in a room that had already begun to operate in his absence. 5 minutes later, Lucas entered, speaking as he walked in. Sorry for the delay, had to finalize one last version of the, he froze mid-sentence when he saw Nathan. There was a long silence. Nathan gestured casually to the chair opposite him. Lucas. Glad you could join us. Lucas collected himself quickly, setting his briefcase down and sliding into the seat with practiced ease. Well, this is a surprise. Nathan leaned forward slightly. Why don't we get started? The presentation began as planned. The consultant opened a deck on the screen and walked through the project timeline. Lucas remained composed, explaining the Horizon platform's core features, its anticipated launch trajectory, the data models behind its adaptive learning engine, and most notably, how it was a continuation of Nathan's original vision. Nathan listened silently, nodding occasionally, asking pointed but fair questions. He made no mention of the documents from the previous night or the forged signature. Not yet. Let the presentation unravel on its own terms. The investors responded positively to the proposal, impressed by the numbers and innovation. When one of them asked Nathan directly how the project aligned with his broader company strategy, he smiled thinly. It's certainly ambitious, he said. And it raises a lot of interesting questions. But innovation only works if it's built on transparency and trust. I'll need to review a few internal details before we move forward. The meeting ended with polite handshakes and vague promises of follow-ups. As the room emptied, Nathan stayed seated, watching Lucas gather his things. Once they were alone, he finally spoke. So, Nathan said, calm but firm. Are you going to explain how a project of this scale launched under my name, without my knowledge? Lucas exhaled slowly. Look, Nathan, before you jump to conclusions, I was going to tell you everything. When? Nathan asked. Before or after the investment deal closed? Lucas sat back down. You've been stretched thin for months. You barely touch the product side anymore. I saw an opportunity to push forward with something I knew you'd support, if you had time to hear it. I admit, I moved fast. Maybe too fast. You used my name, Nathan said, voice steady. My reputation. You forged documents. I didn't forge anything, Lucas said defensively. The signature was a digital copy we've used in internal drafts before. It wasn't meant for external use. But it was used externally. These investors believe I endorsed this. Lucas hesitated. I didn't expect you to come back early. Nathan nodded, the weight of that admission settling between them. And Claire? Lucas blinked. What about Claire? The documents were in my home. On our kitchen table. Lucas looked genuinely puzzled. I left them in your office last week. I asked Claire to pass them to you. She said she would. Nathan felt a strange chill. Claire had received the documents. She hadn't said a word. Lucas stood, cautious now. Look, I get it. I overstepped. But the project is real. It's good. And it can elevate everything we've built. Just give it a chance. Nathan didn't respond. He watched as Lucas walked out, leaving the silence behind like a shadow. Back in his private office, Nathan closed the door and locked it. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. If this project had already progressed this far, there would be traces, emails, shared drives, investor communications. He began digging through folders, accessing back-end systems only he had full clearance for. What he found over the next hour astonished him. Lucas had created a parallel team. Designers, developers, a full QA unit, all working quietly on Horizon over the past 4 months. Communications had been filtered through private email threads. Some funding had even been reallocated internally without triggering alerts, small enough transfers to avoid suspicion, but substantial when totaled. Nathan sat back, stunned. This wasn't a casual oversight. This was orchestration. And yet, the platform itself was good. Potentially game-changing. He was torn between admiration and betrayal. He minimized the windows and stared at his own reflection in the darkened screen. This wasn't just about a project. It was about control. Trust. Direction. He picked up his phone and opened a new message to Claire. It sat there unsent for several seconds before he deleted it and locked the screen. He needed to talk to her. But not yet. Not until he was certain just how deep this went. Nathan left the building that afternoon with his thoughts tangled in silence. The office walls that once echoed with his ideas now seemed to host shadows of conversations he was never invited to. Each corridor he passed earlier had felt slightly too busy, each nod from an employee just a little too cautious. He couldn't be certain yet, but there was a creeping sense that people had adjusted to his absence, as if the company had continued spinning without him at the center. He spent the rest of the day in his home office, dissecting the file structures, logging IP traces, and mapping the digital architecture that Lucas had secretly assembled. By nightfall, he had a clear picture of the internal tools Lucas used to compartmentalize the Horizon project. Nathan didn't make a move. Not yet. He wasn't ready to confront Claire, and he didn't want to tip his hand to Lucas. He needed to be methodical, careful. This wasn't just about a product anymore. It was about his role in a company he had built from scratch. The next morning, Nathan arrived at the office earlier than usual. It was barely past 7 o'clock when he pulled into the underground garage. The building hadn't yet come alive, only the maintenance staff moved through the halls. He appreciated the quiet. It gave him time to think. As he stepped out of the elevator, his assistant, Marina, was already at her desk. "You're early," she said, surprised. "Could say the same for you." She smiled politely. "Investor summaries were waiting on my inbox. I figured I'd get ahead of them." Nathan paused. "Did Lucas schedule any meetings for me today?" Marina glanced at her screen. "No. Your calendar's clear, aside from the usual development status update at noon. Do you want me to move that?" He shook his head. "Leave it." He entered his office and sat down, staring out the tall windows as the city slowly lit up. A few moments later, he turned to his monitor and began drafting an internal memo, but something caught his attention, a notification at the corner of the screen. A meeting invite had just popped up, time-stamped only seconds earlier. The subject line read, "Strategy Session, Core Team Only." The location, Conference Room 7. Time, 10 o'clock sharp. Nathan clicked on the invite. He wasn't listed as a recipient. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. Without hesitation, he stood, left his office, and walked to the floor's smaller wing where Conference Room 7 was located. It was tucked away behind a row of unused storage rooms, rarely used except for private discussions or rapid brainstorming sessions. The hallway was empty, but the motion sensor lights flicked on ahead of him. As he approached, he heard faint voices coming from behind the door. He recognized one of them, Lucas. Another voice, lower and unfamiliar, responded. Nathan glanced at his watch. It was just after 9:30. He moved to the side of the door, out of the line of sight from anyone inside, and waited. The walls were thin enough for short fragments to leak through. "Still not sure if he suspects anything," said Lucas. "We'll know by next week," said the other voice. "The rollout is timed. The board will vote with the numbers in front of them." Nathan's breath caught. "A vote?" Lucas continued, "If he slows us down, we shift strategy. I can still present it as a joint initiative. You said the approvals were solid. Any chance he pushes back legally?" "No. He's too careful. He'll try to solve it quietly. He always does." Nathan turned away from the door, careful not to make a sound. His mind spun, but his face remained unreadable. This wasn't just about an unsanctioned project anymore. There was a strategy to bypass him entirely. A board vote, clearly orchestrated while he was out of state. He returned to his office, closed the door, and sat down without removing his coat. He opened his private drive and began pulling internal emails, financial trails, and meeting logs. Within minutes, he identified 3 board members who had been involved in communications related to Horizon. They had received confidential updates from Lucas over the past month, masked under generalized memos about innovation metrics. Nathan leaned forward, elbows on the desk, hands clasped. If there was going to be a vote, it had to be stopped before it was proposed. But doing so without exposing how he learned about it meant he had to get ahead, legally, ethically, and strategically. He made a decision. He needed insight from someone outside the company. At 11 o'clock, he left the office unannounced and drove across town to a quiet cafe on Hamilton Avenue. He waited in a secluded corner booth until a man in a gray sweater and pressed slacks entered, scanning the room until his eyes met Nathan's. Harold Evans, once a professor of education reform, now a retired consultant, and the closest thing Nathan had to a mentor. "I was surprised to get your call," Harold said as he Saturday, "You rarely reach out unless something's wrong." Nathan nodded. "Something's wrong." He gave Harold a measured account of the last 48 hours, omitting only the most personal parts. The documents, the unauthorized project, the investors, the board vote, the way his own voice had been quietly pushed out of his company. Harold listened silently, his expression unreadable. When Nathan finished, Harold leaned back and said, "You're being outmaneuvered. Not overpowered. There's a difference." Nathan frowned. "Feels the same from here." "Then change the view," Harold said calmly. "They're using your leadership style against you. You built a company on trust, loyalty, and shared vision. It's admirable. But it also creates space for ambition to flourish unnoticed. Especially when you step back, even slightly." "I didn't think stepping back meant stepping away." "No. But they did." Nathan said nothing for a moment. "Then, what would you do?" Harold considered the question. "Take control without confrontation. You don't need to break the trust you built. You just need to remind everyone why you're the one they trusted in the first place." Nathan exhaled slowly. "Easier said than done." Harold smiled. "You've done harder." The conversation grounded him. As they left the cafe, Nathan felt something he hadn't felt since returning from Chicago: resolve. He returned to the office in time for the noon development update. As he entered the meeting room, Lucas looked up from his laptop, masking his surprise. Around the table sat 5 key members of the product team, none of whom had been part of the Horizon discussions. Nathan took his seat at the head of the table. "Let's change the agenda," he said. "I want each of you to describe where you see the company's next big leap. Don't think of current projects. Think beyond that. No limits." The team exchanged confused glances, but one by one, they began offering ideas, some cautious, others bold. Nathan listened closely, encouraging them, pushing for clarity, asking the kinds of questions he used to when the company was just a dream. Lucas remained silent through most of it. By the end of the hour, the whiteboard was filled with new paths, none of them connected to Horizon. Nathan stood, marker in hand. "This is what we built. Vision. Possibility. We're not a platform. We're a movement." He turned to the team. "Let's not forget that." As the meeting broke up, he caught Lucas's eye. They both knew the message had been delivered. Now, Nathan thought, it was time to move faster than them. And much, much quieter. The days that followed moved with deceptive quiet. On the surface, the company ran as usual, meetings were held, updates circulated, progress reports delivered on time. But beneath that, Nathan was tracing a web of interactions that stretched far deeper than he'd anticipated. Lucas hadn't just pitched a project, he had built a system, and it was clear now that Horizon wasn't operating in isolation. Late Tuesday morning, Nathan entered the operations wing under the pretense of reviewing vendor contracts. What he was really looking for was proof of cross-departmental collaboration, code sharing, resource reallocation, or any evidence that parts of the company had been redirected quietly toward Horizon's development. He kept his search confined to physical documents this time, internal logs, printouts, archived folders. Digital traces could be deleted or hidden. Paper was harder to disguise. In a locked file cabinet near the network operations room, he found something odd, an unlabeled manila folder with a chart of internal API gateways. Most of it looked standard, until he saw 3 interface points marked with aliases he didn't recognize, all of them tagged LC. There was no departmental owner listed, no notes on development stages or integration. Just raw connections. Hidden bridges. Nathan snapped a photo with his phone and replaced the folder exactly as he had found it. He left the floor without speaking to anyone and returned to his office. An hour later, he called in Daniel Reyes, the head of data security. "Can I trust you?" Nathan asked the moment Daniel entered. Daniel blinked. "I'd hope so." Nathan turned his screen to face him and displayed the photograph chart. "I need to know where these lead." Quietly. Daniel studied the image for a few seconds, his brows drawing closer. "These aren't on the official architecture." "I know. That's why you're here." Daniel nodded slowly. "Give me 24 hours. Nathan agreed, but he didn't stop moving. That afternoon, he took a detour to the design department. While most of the team worked in open spaces, Lucas had always maintained a habit of booking the same enclosed glass meeting pod when discussing new visual concepts. Nathan waited until he saw it in use, Lucas inside, speaking with two junior UI designers. He didn't interrupt. He watched. One of the designers, a woman named Jody, exited 10 minutes later with a mock-up folder in hand. Nathan followed her to the far side of the floor. "Jody," he said casually. "Got a minute?" She turned quickly, startled but smiling. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Can I see the latest wireframes?" She hesitated. "They're still very raw." "That's exactly why I want to see them." She handed him the folder, which he flipped open on a side table. The images were high-resolution interface sketches, login panels, classroom dashboards, data visualization overlays. But they weren't for any of the company's current products. The branding had been stripped, the UI framework unfamiliar. "These aren't from Insight or Nova," he said. "What project are they for?" Jody hesitated. Lucas didn't say. Just that it was exploratory. "Internal only." "Has he shown you a product name?" She shook her head. "No. But the folders on the shared drive are tagged Phase 3 Prototype. That's all I know." Nathan returned the folder gently. "You've done excellent work. Keep copies for your portfolio." As he turned away, his phone vibrated. A new message from Daniel. "Found something. Need to talk in person. Not on company network." Nathan met him in the underground parking garage just after dusk. Daniel handed him a USB drive in silence. "What am I looking at?" Nathan asked. "Encrypted relay logs. Those interface points you found, they route internal data out to an isolated cloud server. Masked under generic analytics." Nathan stared at the device. "Who set it up?" "Someone with elevated credentials. Not admin level, but close." "Lucas?" Daniel hesitated. "Possibly. Or someone he's working with. Either way, they've been running data simulations with anonymized student behavior models, stuff we've never greenlit for external analysis." Nathan clenched his jaw. "How long?" "At least 3 months." He thanked Daniel and left, tucking the USB safely into his jacket. By the time he arrived home, the sun was gone, and the house was dim. Claire was in the kitchen, plating leftovers from dinner. "You're late again," she said, not unkindly. "Meetings ran long." She poured him a glass of water and slid it across the counter. "You've been quiet lately." Nathan studied her face. "So have you." Claire glanced away. "Things have felt tense." "Because they are." She set down her fork, as if bracing herself. "Is this about Lucas?" His gaze didn't waver. "Should it be?" She didn't answer right away. "He came by last week." "You were still in Chicago." Nathan nodded. "And?" "He dropped off some material. Said you'd be reviewing it soon." Nathan waited. "Did you look at it?" Claire looked directly at him now. "Of course I did. It was in our name. I thought it was something you'd already approved. But when I asked about it later, he said you'd come around eventually." Nathan exhaled slowly. He's been planning a full product launch behind my back. Her expression changed. That wasn't clear from the documents. There's going to be a board vote. He wants Horizon greenlit as a flagship platform. Claire stood still for a moment, absorbing that. I didn't help him, Nathan, she said. If that's what you think, I believe you. But the silence between them lingered. The next morning, Nathan arrived at the office before dawn. He printed the decrypted logs Daniel had provided and created a new document cross-referencing known employee IDs with system access timestamps. One match stood out: Colin Marks, a mid-level systems engineer with clearance to back-end analytics. Nathan pulled Colin's employment file. He had transferred departments 4 months ago, from system maintenance to data operations. Around the same time Horizon's hidden infrastructure had gone live. At 8 o'clock sharp, Nathan called Colin into his office. You know why I asked you here? Nathan asked. Colin looked pale already. No, sir. Nathan didn't speak. He simply turned the monitor to face him, an access log with Colin's credentials on every line. I didn't know what it was for, Colin said quickly. Lucas said it was experimental. That it would help generate testing models. Did you know it was routed outside our system? Colin swallowed hard. No. I just configured what he asked. I didn't see the outbound paths. Nathan dismissed him without further comment, making it clear the conversation was not over. But now he had proof. Lucas had help. Not just conceptual collaborators, but technical operators feeding his expansion. By late afternoon, Nathan sat alone in the strategy room, walls covered in diagrams, logs, photos, and notes. Horizon wasn't a rogue idea anymore. It was an infrastructure embedded into the company. And Lucas had allies in nearly every department, consciously or not. Nathan stared at the word he had written at the top of the whiteboard. Control. He circled it. Everything pointed back to that. If Lucas's vision succeeded, Nathan wouldn't just lose authority. He'd lose the very DNA of the company. And he wasn't ready to let that happen. Nathan entered the house that night with his keys still in his hand, held tightly as though they anchored him to something he could still control. The lights in the foyer were off. Claire hadn't left the usual small lamp on the entry table, which she always did when expecting him late. The quiet didn't feel like peace, it felt like withdrawal. He moved through the house slowly, not calling her name. He didn't want answers tonight. Not yet. He wanted to observe, just as he had at the office, quietly, patiently, pulling threads. The kitchen was clean. Too clean. The sink empty, the counters wiped down as if the day had never happened. A single place setting remained on the table, hers. Nathan checked the fridge out of habit and found untouched leftovers from the night before. The absence of any new dishes confirmed what he already suspected: she hadn't eaten dinner at home. Upstairs, the bedroom door was half shut. He knocked softly before entering. Claire was sitting in bed with a tablet in her lap, wearing reading glasses and earbuds. When she saw him, she slid one earbud out and set the device down. Hey, she said, quiet but not cold. You're working? Trying to. Nathan didn't sit. Were you at the office today? She hesitated. Briefly. Had some logistics to wrap up with procurement. Why? You didn't stop by my office. I wasn't sure if that was something you wanted. He nodded once and turned away. Good night. Nathan, she called softly before he reached the door. Are we okay? He paused. I'm not sure yet. He didn't wait for her reply. The next morning, he didn't go straight to his office. Instead, he made a deliberate choice to walk the main floor of the building, passing through departments without warning, stopping by teams that hadn't seen him in weeks. Some offered warm greetings, others shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of his sudden visibility. At the customer experience desk, he greeted the new intern by name, then asked a passing analyst about onboarding figures. At marketing, He praised a campaign that had recently outperformed expectations. It wasn't just about being seen, it was about reminding people he still saw them. At 10 o'clock, he entered the product alignment meeting without a calendar invite. It was led by Tasha Griggs, one of the company's most respected managers. She looked surprised but recovered quickly, offering him a seat. Nathan listened for the first 15 minutes, taking notes in a small leather journal. Then he raised his hand slightly. "Tasha, how are cross-team communications with the Horizon prototype?" The room shifted. Tasha glanced at her team. "We haven't been looped into that. We were told it was still in exploratory mode." "By whom?" "Lucas." Nathan nodded slowly. "Would you be willing to evaluate the platform independently?" Quietly. Tasha's eyes sharpened. "You're asking me to audit it?" "I'm asking you to confirm whether it reflects our standards of product readiness." "You'll report directly to me." "And only me." She considered, then nodded once. "I'll begin today." When the meeting ended, Lucas entered the room as Nathan stood to leave. "You're making a lot of rounds," Lucas said, carefully neutral. "Company needed a reminder that I'm still in it." Lucas tilted his head. "Nobody's forgotten. People just adapt when things shift." "Things didn't shift, Lucas. You tried to move them." Lucas smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You always said evolution required bold steps. Boldness doesn't require deception." The moment passed, brittle as glass. Nathan returned to his office and opened his email. One unread message stood out. Subject: Scheduled briefing, Vanguard Holdings. Sent from Lucas, marked high priority. The body was curt, confirming briefing on Horizon for Thursday morning with investor reps, finalized presentation attached. "Let me know if you'll be joining." He didn't respond. Instead, he opened the attached presentation. It had been polished further since the last version he saw. More metrics, fresh market modeling, tighter projections. Yet one thing hadn't changed: his name remained prominent throughout, as if he were the architect of the entire vision. He closed the file and dialed Tasha directly. "How soon can you get me preliminary impressions?" "I'll pull in 2 senior engineers. Give me 48 hours. I need it in 24. She didn't argue. "Understood." That evening, Nathan sat at the dining table after dinner, one Claire hadn't joined him for. She had left a note on the fridge, headed to yoga, back late. He pushed his plate aside and opened the file folder again, this time reviewing physical printouts of internal chat transcripts. Daniel had managed to extract them from an auxiliary server. Several conversations between Lucas and unnamed team members showed careful language, nothing incriminating on the surface. But one message stood out. "Once the board approves, transition will be smoother if NC plays along. If not, we handle it internally." Nathan circled the initials with a pen. He had underestimated how far Lucas was willing to take this. The silence in the house that night felt different, heavier. As if both he and Claire were waiting for the other to break the stillness first, but neither willing to step across the void. The next day, Tasha came to his office with a tablet in her hands and a tight expression on her face. "I know you said no summaries. But I need to show you this." She sat across from him and pulled up a back-end analysis. The codebase for Horizon borrows from existing IP, our original learning algorithm. But it's been modified. The new version's cleaner, leaner, and more adaptive. Whoever's behind it isn't just building on your legacy. They're rewriting it. Nathan leaned forward. "How much of our original structure did they use?" "Enough to make ownership a legal nightmare if this goes public before you assert control." "Can we prove derivative work?" "Yes. But the teams layered it well. This wasn't amateur." Nathan sat back, eyes unfocused. "And the user model testing?" he asked. Tasha hesitated. "It's legit. Impressive even. But aggressive. Data pulled from school pilot programs without explicit participant permission. Could be an ethics problem." Nathan rubbed his temples. I want you to keep going. I'll handle the next step. She nodded and left without another word. That afternoon, Claire stopped by his office for the first time in days. You free? She asked, standing in the doorway. Nathan gestured for her to come in. She sat without speaking for a long time, then finally said, I've been thinking. About what? About how we got here. He didn't answer. I used to understand your world, she continued. Now I'm not sure I do. I didn't know Lucas was this deep in. But I also didn't ask. And maybe that's on me. Nathan looked at her. Are you working with him? Her eyes flinched slightly, but she shook her head. No. But I believed him when I shouldn't have. And I let your distance become an excuse. We've both been distant. She nodded. So what now? Nathan stood and walked to the window. Now I take back control. Not by force. But by presence. Claire stood, as if deciding whether to stay or go. I'll support you, she said. Whatever comes. Nathan turned to face her. I hope that's true. She left, and once again, the office fell into silence. But this time, Nathan welcomed it. Because silence could be a weapon. Or a warning. And he was ready to use it either way. It was just past 8 o'clock in the morning when Lucas knocked on Nathan's office door. Nathan didn't look up from his desk. It's open, he said, his voice even. Lucas stepped in, holding a folder and a sleek, black tablet. He waited for Nathan to acknowledge him, but Nathan continued typing for another 30 seconds before turning his chair. I thought we should talk, Lucas began. Nathan gestured to the chair across from him. By all means. Lucas sat down and placed the folder on the desk, sliding it forward. This is the prototype. The actual build. Not slides. Not drafts. Code. Working logic. And a detailed plan for rollout. Nathan didn't touch the folder. And you're giving me this now because it's ready. And it's good. Better than anything we've done before. I wanted you to see it firsthand before Thursday's meeting. The one I wasn't consulted about. Lucas didn't flinch. You've seen the data. You know this project has legs. I've seen a lot more than data. Lucas looked at him closely. I won't apologize for being ambitious, Nathan. You know I've always pushed the limits. It's how we've grown. Nathan leaned back. There's a difference between pushing and bypassing. I never meant to cut you out. I just stopped waiting for you to catch up. The air between them thinned. Lucas leaned forward now. Let's drop the posturing. Horizon works. You know it. And the board will see that. But this doesn't have to be a takeover. It can still be yours. Nathan's eyes narrowed. Define yours. Lucas slid the tablet across the desk, unlocking it as he did. Full integration into CLS. Under your leadership. With Horizon as its innovation branch. I'll run that branch. We formalize it, spin it as evolution, not rebellion. You keep the crown, I build the kingdom. Nathan stared at the screen, not touching it. So now it's diplomacy. It's practicality. You've seen how this company moves without friction when you're not in every room. And you've seen what can be created when I'm given space. Let's be honest about what works. Nathan sat silently, calculating. Of course, we'd need a few formalities to make it stick, Lucas continued. Board endorsement, joint announcement, and a restructured operating agreement for Horizon's autonomy. And Claire? Lucas blinked. What about her? She was named as an advisory on some of the strategy decks. Was that your idea? Lucas looked slightly uneasy now. She offered feedback. I figured it was wise to show alignment. Without asking her? Lucas hesitated. I didn't think it would be a problem. Nathan stood, pacing slowly toward the window. You know what the real problem is, Lucas? Lucas remained seated. Enlighten me. You assume you've already won. That the structure you built is permanent. But this company isn't code and projections. It's people. Relationships. Trust. And you think you still have all of that? Nathan turned sharply. No. But I have something you don't. Memory. Lucas tilted his head. Of what? Of every decision made to get us here. Every sacrifice. Every person who stuck through the lean years before a single investor ever called us back. You may have speed. But I have roots. Lucas stood slowly. Then let's put that to the test. They locked eyes for a long beat. Nathan picked up the folder finally, flipping through the executive summary, reading each line carefully. This is your best work, he said without emotion. I know. And your biggest risk. Lucas said nothing. Nathan closed the folder. I'll respond by end of day. Lucas left without another word. That afternoon, Nathan walked into the legal department unannounced and asked to meet with Diana Lee, head counsel. They sat in a private conference room, where Nathan laid out the tablet and folder and laid bare the situation. Diana reviewed the documents, expression unreadable. So let me understand this, she said after scanning the key terms. Lucas is offering to formally hand over Horizon under the condition of operational autonomy and brand distinction. In essence, a company within your company. Correct. Structurally feasible, but strategically volatile. Especially if the board is already split. They're not split, Nathan said. They're uninformed. I've been letting Lucas speak in my absence. That ends today. Diana nodded. What's your intention? To accept the proposal on my terms. No autonomy. Horizon becomes a department. Not an entity. And if he refuses? I make it clear to the board how this unfolded. Including every hidden transfer, misused credential, and manipulated endorsement. Diana leaned back. That would spark a full audit. Nathan nodded once. Exactly. By late afternoon, he had a new version of the proposal drafted, clean, integrated, centralizing oversight under executive review. Horizon would not be a splinter company. It would live and breathe within CLS. Lucas could still lead it, but only with transparency. Nathan emailed the revised document with a single sentence, my version of the future. Take it or leave it. 2 hours passed with no reply. Around 7 o'clock, as most of the staff filtered out for the evening, Claire appeared in Nathan's doorway. She held a small folder in her hand and looked tired. Found this in the shared project archive, she said, placing it on his desk. Old roadmap. You wrote it years ago. Before any of this started. Nathan opened it. Inside were early sketches of what would become CLS's core platform, handwritten notes in his own script, scribbled with idealism and the kind of ambition that came before politics. I forgot I still had it, Claire said. Thought you might want the reminder. He closed the folder gently. I do. She hovered for a moment, then said, Lucas asked me to push you. Nathan looked at her. He said if I spoke to you in favor of the deal, it might soften you. I told him I wasn't a messenger. Nathan's voice was quiet. Thank you. Claire nodded once and left. Just before 8, an email came in from Lucas. Subject, counteroffer. Body, we're close. Meet me tomorrow. 7:30. Before the board convenes. Nathan stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Agreed. My office. He leaned back in his chair, exhausted but focused. The pieces were shifting again, this time under his control. Lucas's offer had signaled more than ambition, it had shown vulnerability. A willingness to compromise meant the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he pretended. Nathan shut off the lights in his office and walked out without looking back. Tomorrow, the final terms would be set. But not by Lucas. Not anymore. The morning was unusually still as Nathan left the house, earlier than usual, dressed with a sharpness that hadn't been there in weeks. He carried no laptop, only a leather folio tucked under one arm and the clarity of a decision already made. The air was cool, the sky cloudless, deceptively calm for a day that would reshape the internal structure of Carter Learning Systems. He arrived at the office at 7 o'clock sharp. The halls were nearly empty, just a few maintenance workers finishing their rounds. Nathan made his way directly to his office, switched on the overhead lights, and laid out the contents of his folder on the table, his version of the Horizon integration proposal, printed and annotated by hand. At precisely 7:30, Lucas walked in without knocking. His expression was unreadable, but he wore the neutral composure of someone who had weighed outcomes carefully and arrived with a card up his sleeve. "I read your revision," Lucas said, dropping his bag on the chair. "You're not leaving much room for negotiation." Nathan didn't sit. "It's not a negotiation anymore. It's a framework. Clean. Accountable. Real." Lucas glanced down at the pages laid out on the table, his eyes scanning the familiar terms: no structural autonomy, no separate branding, oversight from the executive core, and mandatory alignment with corporate governance. "This strips Horizon of what made it innovative," Lucas said. "No," Nathan replied. "It strips it of secrecy. Of improvised leadership. It ensures its brilliance isn't overshadowed by misconduct." Lucas walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "You know this move will cost you. The board may see it as overreach. Only if you frame it that way." Lucas turned slowly. "And what if I don't sign this? Then I'll proceed without your signature. You can resign or be reassigned. Either way, Horizon stays with us." Lucas narrowed his eyes. "You wouldn't push me out." "I don't want to," Nathan said. "But I will." They stood there for a long beat, each weighing the line between principle and power. Then Lucas slowly extended his hand across the table. "I'll sign. Under one condition." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Let me deliver the rollout pitch to the board. My voice. My design. But under your name." Nathan considered it. "Fine," he said. "But you stick to the script. No additions, no diversions. You present the version I approved." Lucas gave a half nod and sat down. The deal was sealed with no further words. Just 2 pens, 2 signatures, and an unspoken understanding that their partnership, once built on mutual ambition, was now balanced precariously on control and containment. Nathan left the office after the board meeting had been confirmed for that afternoon. But instead of preparing with his team, he drove an hour out of the city, toward the coastal hills where quiet still existed, unbothered by emails, meetings, and timelines. He parked outside a modest 2-story home perched on a ridge, its porch wrapped in ivy, its windows wide open to the breeze. It looked untouched by time. Harold Evans opened the door before Nathan even knocked. "You look like a man who finally stopped pretending he wasn't in a fight," Harold said. Nathan allowed himself the smallest smile. "I thought you might say that." They sat outside on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the slope behind the house. Below, vineyards stretched in neat rows toward the horizon, the Pacific shimmering beyond them. "I took your advice," Nathan said. "And?" "I confronted him with a version of the future I could accept. Made him choose between fading out or folding in. And he folded? He's not stupid. Just restless." Harold nodded slowly. "They often are. Restless people create the most, but they destroy just as easily if not anchored." Nathan looked out toward the ocean. "I don't know if I won this." "Not really. It's not about winning," Harold said. "It's about regaining authorship of your own narrative." There was a long pause. Nathan asked, "Have you ever had someone you trusted turn your strengths into weaknesses?" Harold let out a slow breath. "Once. A long time ago. He was brilliant, charming, and just impulsive enough to be dangerous. I mistook his energy for vision. I let him run unchecked. And by the time I realized he was shaping the organization into something I no longer recognized, it was too late. What happened? I left, Harold said simply. I walked away from the institute I had built because staying would have meant becoming a figurehead. Nathan shook his head. That's not an option for me. Nor should it be, Harold said. But it means you have to lead differently now. Not just by example, but by presence. No more distance. No more silence. Nathan turned his eyes from the horizon to the older man beside him. You ever think about going back? Harold chuckled. Only when I'm reading your updates. You remind me why it was worth building in the first place. They sat for a while longer, the wind carrying scents of salt and earth. Finally, Nathan stood. I need to get back. Harold rose with him. Then do it with clarity. Don't punish Lucas for ambition. But never let him rewrite the rules again. Nathan nodded, the words embedding themselves deeper than he let on. As he drove back to the city, his phone buzzed with updates: Tasha's final audit report confirming the integrity of Horizon's infrastructure, Diana's memo on the legal standing of the internal agreement, Claire's short text, I'll be there. Let me know where I can help. By the time he reached the building, he knew what had to be done. The board meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock. Nathan entered the room at 2:59. Claire was already seated near the back, her presence quiet but grounding. Lucas stood near the head of the long table, a presentation already cued on the screen. The room hushed as Nathan approached. Before we begin, he said, there's been a change to the presentation. You'll see updated copies in your email. Lucas hesitated for a moment, then resumed his place at the front. He delivered the pitch with poise, sticking to the language Nathan had approved. He walked through metrics, outlined development progress, and reiterated the value Horizon would bring, not as a radical departure, but as an evolution, guided and anchored by the company's founding vision. The board asked questions. Nathan answered most of them himself, reclaiming the narrative. By the end, the tone of the room had shifted. The vote wasn't just a formality, it was unanimous. Horizon would move forward. But under Nathan's terms. As the board members filtered out, Lucas approached, hands in his pockets. That went better than expected, he said. Nathan nodded. It did. Lucas hesitated. Where do we go from here? You run the project, Nathan said. But you report directly to me. Every week. No filters. No side channels. And Claire? She'll be reviewing external strategy. She stays involved. Lucas gave a tight nod. Understood. Nathan watched him leave, then turned to Claire, who waited just behind him. Well, he asked. Claire smiled. You finally look like you're where you're supposed to be. He exhaled. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't tension, it was release. Control had been restored. But more than that, direction had returned. And Nathan wasn't going to let go again. 2 days after the board's unanimous vote, the mood inside Carter Learning Systems shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. Department heads moved with more certainty in the halls, meeting room chatter carried a sharper tone of relevance, and Nathan noticed more eyes meeting his when he walked past. It wasn't fear or even reverence. It was recognition, an acknowledgement that the balance of power had returned to its rightful place. Still, Nathan knew the changes weren't fully cemented. Trust was fragile now. Even among the loyal, there remained quiet questions about how much he had truly been aware of and how much he had allowed to slide during his recent periods of absence. He would need to rebuild that trust with more than executive decisions. He would have to be visible, engaged, and human. Late Thursday afternoon, Tasha entered his office with a small envelope in hand. This just came in for you, she said, placing it on the desk. Nathan looked up from his monitor. A handwritten envelope? That's rare. No sender name. But it came through internal dispatch, not from outside. She left without another word. Nathan opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single ivory card with a gold-embossed crest in the corner. The message was typed, brief, and formal. Mr. Carter, we respectfully request your presence as keynote speaker at the annual statewide Educational Innovation Forum. Your leadership in recent years has significantly impacted the future of digital learning. The event will be held Friday, 2 weeks from today, at the Meridian Convention Center. Formal details attached. Office of the California Education Advancement Council. He leaned back in his chair, reading it again. It wasn't just a speaking opportunity, it was an acknowledgement. A signal that, despite the turbulence, his work still resonated beyond boardrooms and code. He hadn't spoken at a public forum in over a year. Just as he began to process the invitation, Claire stepped into his office with a soft knock. "You busy?" she asked. "Just got something strange. Or, maybe not strange. Surprising." He handed her the card. She read it quickly, then looked up. "You're going?" "I don't know. It's good timing, but also risky. Half the audience will remember Horizon's launch drama." "Which you resolved," she reminded him. "I don't know if they see it that way." Claire sat across from him. "They will if you stand up there and remind them who you are. This is exactly what you need." Nathan hesitated. "Would you come with me?" Her eyes flickered. "As what? Partner? Colleague? PR shield?" He smiled faintly. "Whichever one feels least awkward." She didn't laugh, but the corner of her mouth lifted. "I'll come. But only if you speak honestly. No corporate polish. No approved script." He nodded. "Deal." The next week passed in a blur. With Horizon now formally integrated, Nathan instituted a weekly leadership circle, a small, rotating roundtable where employees from any level could bring ideas directly to the executive team. It was unconventional and, to some, uncomfortable. But Nathan insisted on it. During the first session, a junior QA specialist named Naomi brought forward a concern about the platform's accessibility features, pointing out that despite Horizon's cutting-edge tech, it lacked voice navigation tools for visually impaired users. Lucas, who sat beside Nathan at the table, looked caught off guard. Nathan didn't let it slide. "Why wasn't this flagged in development?" Lucas responded, "We were focused on speed to test. Accessibility was marked for Phase 2. Nathan turned to Naomi. "We'll make it Phase 1. Effective immediately. You'll oversee the report with Lucas's team." Naomi blinked, clearly surprised. "I'm not a lead." "You are now," Nathan said. After the session, Lucas pulled him aside. "You're empowering juniors publicly. That's going to rattle some people." Nathan responded calmly, "It's meant to." That night, Claire found him in the living room working on his speech. Several drafts lay crumpled on the table. "You're overthinking it," she said. He rubbed his forehead. "That's the problem. Everything I want to say sounds like a TED Talk or a shareholder memo. Then stop writing like a CEO." She took the pen from his hand and slid a blank page in front of him. "Write like the guy who started this because he believed school could feel like discovery again." Nathan stared at the page for a long time. Then he began to write. The day of the conference arrived cool and overcast. The Meridian Convention Center bustled with early arrivals, educators, technologists, policymakers, all shuffling through registration booths and exhibit halls. Nathan and Claire entered through a side entrance, escorted by a quiet assistant from the council team. In the green room, Nathan stood alone in front of a full-length mirror. He adjusted his tie, then removed it entirely, opting for an open collar instead. Claire stepped beside him. "You're not dressing down?" "I'm dressing real." At precisely 10 o'clock, he was introduced by the council chair. The applause was polite but restrained, curiosity more than admiration. Nathan stepped onto the stage and stood before a room of hundreds. The lights were hot, the silence expectant. He didn't look at his notes. 10 years ago, he began, I sat in a rented classroom with 3 teachers, a borrowed laptop, and an idea that learning could be designed for engagement, not endurance. The audience leaned in. I believed technology could unlock curiosity. That we didn't have to choose between rigorous education and human connection. He paused. But belief isn't enough. Not in this world. Belief without structure becomes chaos. Vision without ethics becomes manipulation. And I had to learn that the hard way. He spoke openly about Horizon, its potential, its launch, and the internal battle it sparked. I made mistakes, he admitted. Not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped paying close attention. And when you're building systems that impact how people learn, how they discover their future, there's no room for distance. A silence fell across the room. I stand here today not to celebrate what we built, but to take responsibility for how we rebuild it. With more listening. More accessibility. More humility. When he finished, the applause was slow to start, then swelled, not thunderous, but solid. Genuine. As he stepped down, several educators reached out to shake his hand. One quietly said, "It's good to hear someone own something." Backstage, Claire stood waiting. "That," she said, "was your best speech. I didn't even follow the outline." Exactly. Later that evening, back at the house, Nathan sat on the back porch as twilight settled over the yard. He looked out at the sky, not searching for answers anymore, but observing, finally present in the moment. Claire came out carrying 2 glasses of wine. "So," she said, "what now?" Nathan took a sip, thoughtful. "Now we turn Horizon into more than just a product. We turn it into a promise kept." She clinked her glass against his. "To new beginnings." He nodded, quietly smiling. And for the first time in months, the quiet between them felt full, not of things left unsaid, but of things newly understood. A week after the conference, Nathan returned to the office to find a growing calm settling over the company. The rhythm had shifted, still fast-paced, but now measured, collaborative. Horizon's team, once operating in the shadows, now worked openly, woven into the fabric of Carter Learning Systems. Employees who had once tiptoed around executive tensions now spoke more freely, pitching ideas and asking questions without looking over their shoulders. Lucas had adapted as well, operating with surprising restraint. He no longer bypassed leadership processes, and his updates were thorough, clear, and humble. Nathan, observing him during project meetings, could see the internal recalibration taking place, ambition tempered by consequence, confidence checked by the memory of how close everything had come to falling apart. One quiet afternoon, with no pressing meetings and a rare moment of solitude, Nathan decided to go through the last of the archived storage boxes he had kept untouched in his private office closet. It had started as a simple cleanup, an effort to finally discard old contracts, event lanyards, and pre-acquisition reports. But midway through the process, tucked between 2 faded marketing mock-ups, he found something unexpected. A small, white envelope, handwritten and sealed with a thin red ribbon. No address, no date, just his name on the front in Claire's cursive. He froze. He remembered the envelope now. Barely. It had been left for him on their kitchen counter years ago, during the company's first major funding round. He'd meant to read it but had gotten distracted, calls, meetings, the whirlwind of growth, and somewhere along the way, it had been boxed with office documents and forgotten. He sat down and carefully opened the seal. The paper inside was soft with age, the ink slightly faded but still legible. Claire's handwriting was fluid, personal, more vulnerable than anything he'd seen from her in recent years. "Nathan. If you're reading this, it means we're either where we hope to be, or lost somewhere far from it. I wrote this in a moment of hope. When we were still building everything, still dreaming without knowing where it might lead. You were working late almost every night, talking about vision, culture, the kind of change we could make if we just stayed focused. And I believed in all of it. I still do. But I wanted to write something down, not for the business plan or the pitch deck, but for us. I wanted you to remember that this started as more than a company. It was a promise. To ourselves, to each other, that we wouldn't let growth replace meaning. That we'd stay close to why we started. If we ever lose sight of that, I hope this letter brings it back. Claire. Nathan sat motionless for a long time. The weight of the letter settled over him, not just the words, but the timing. It had been written in the beginning, before the distractions, before the expansions, before Lucas. It was a snapshot of a pure version of their dream, unmarred by politics or profit margins. He read it again. Then he picked up his phone. Claire answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said. "Can you meet me at the house?" Nathan asked. "Soon? Everything okay?" He hesitated. "I just found something. I think you should see it." She agreed without asking more. When she arrived, the house was quiet, lit only by the soft evening light pouring through the front windows. Nathan was waiting in the living room, the letter unfolded on the table. He didn't say anything. Just gestured for her to sit and slid the letter toward her. Claire stared at it for a moment, then picked it up. Her face shifted as she read. By the end, her eyes were glassy. "I forgot I wrote this," she said softly. "I forgot I even had it," he replied. She set it down gently. "That was a different version of us." "Maybe," Nathan said. "But maybe it's still here. Just buried." Claire looked at him for a long time. "You've changed." "So have you. That's not always a bad thing." He nodded. "But I want to find the version that wrote this. Both of us." Claire took a deep breath. "You think we can?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I want to try." They sat in silence for a while, not tense or awkward, just quiet. Processing. Remembering. Later that night, Claire brought out an old photo album from the early days of the company. They flipped through pages of launch events, messy desks, handwritten diagrams, and grainy pictures of them in borrowed conference rooms, scribbling on whiteboards, their eyes bright with exhaustion and hope. Nathan stopped on one image, Claire standing next to him, holding a marker mid-sentence, smiling at something he must have said off-camera. She looked alive in a way he hadn't seen in months. "I remember that day," she said. "That was the first time we pitched our curriculum framework to actual educators. You wore that gray blazer," he added. "With the broken pocket you refused to fix." "I still have it," she laughed. They stayed like that for over an hour, flipping pages, sharing memories that had been dormant for years. It wasn't dramatic or revelatory. But it was real. And real was what they needed now. The next morning, Nathan arrived at the office early, the letter still in his jacket pocket. It wasn't symbolic. He just didn't want to leave it behind. During his check-in with the Horizon Development team, he proposed a new initiative, a cross-functional origin audit. The goal was to revisit the company's founding values and compare them against current workflows, decision-making structures, and product goals. "It's not about nostalgia," he told them. "It's about alignment. I want to make sure that 10 years in, we're still solving the same problem we set out to fix." One engineer raised his hand. "What if we find out we're not?" Nathan smiled. "Then we realign." The proposal was met with curiosity, but also with energy. The younger employees especially seemed eager to understand the roots of the company they had joined. Later that week, Claire met with the brand strategy team to help reshape the company's storytelling, not as a rebrand, but a restoration. They agreed to create a short documentary-style video campaign featuring the early days of CLS, weaving in footage, photos, and interviews with longtime employees. It would premiere at the company's 10-year anniversary gala, now only 3 months away. That night, Nathan and Claire returned to the house together, not as a couple healed, but as two people finally facing the same direction. After dinner, Claire paused in the hallway near Nathan's home office. "You still have the letter?" she asked. He nodded. "In my jacket." She smiled. "Keep it there." And he would. Because in a business world that changed every quarter, some things were worth holding on to. The following Monday began with an energy Nathan hadn't felt in a long time, an undercurrent of movement that wasn't rushed or reactive, but intentional. The kind of movement that comes from shared vision instead of sheer momentum. At headquarters, the cross-functional teams were already preparing their preliminary findings from the origin audit Nathan had proposed. The initiative, once seen as symbolic, had unexpectedly ignited real conversations across the company. People weren't just looking at what they were doing, but why they were doing it. Departments that rarely interacted began sharing insights. Designers talked to curriculum analysts. Engineers asked teachers for feedback. Even HR started rewriting onboarding material based on the company's foundational principles rather than standard corporate jargon. Nathan observed all this quietly, only stepping in when needed. He was becoming more conductor than performer now, setting the tone, adjusting the tempo, ensuring every player was in sync. At 10 o'clock that morning, he called Lucas into his office. Lucas entered, holding his tablet, his posture composed but not stiff. "Take a seat," Nathan said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. Lucas sat without comment. Nathan folded his hands. Horizon is officially out of its isolation phase. But before we finalize its positioning inside CLS, I want to talk structure. Lucas raised an eyebrow. I thought the board already approved its integration. They approved the existence of Horizon within CLS. What they didn't do was outline how its leadership model would evolve now that it's not a shadow project. Lucas gave a tight nod. Okay. What do you have in mind? Nathan reached for a folder and slid it across the table. I'm proposing Horizon become an innovation hub. A dedicated unit under the CLS umbrella, with its own internal task forces, but no independent board, no siloed operations. Everything filters back through the Executive Council. That includes budget, ethics review, and cross-departmental impact. Lucas opened the folder, scanning the outline. This would make me, what? Director of Innovation? If that's what you want to call it. And I'd report to? To me. But also to the team leads your work affects. Accountability flows both ways now. Lucas closed the folder and looked up. You're giving me a team, but not control. I'm giving you something better, sustainability. You've proven your vision works. Now I need you to prove you can scale it without breaking everything around it. Lucas considered that for a moment. And if I don't? Then Horizon dissolves into general product development. And you go back to lead engineering. There was a long pause. Lucas finally said, You've changed. Nathan met his gaze. So have you. Lucas gave a short, thoughtful nod. I'll take it. Nathan leaned back. Good. We announce the structure publicly at the internal summit next week. I want this transition to be transparent. As Lucas left, Nathan turned his attention to the second, more personal part of his day's agenda. That afternoon, he met Claire for coffee outside the office, not at a conference table, not in the car, but at a small cafe near the old campus where they had once sketched out their first ideas on paper napkins. The place hadn't changed much, same uneven tables, same overambitious espresso machine, same tiny chalkboard announcing Open Mic Thursdays in faint, dusty script. Claire arrived wearing a soft gray sweater and minimal makeup, her presence casual but still poised. You ordered yet? She asked. No, Nathan said. Was waiting. They both sat, ordered 2 Americanos, and then let the quiet settle around them. Finally, Claire said, So? You're restructuring everything again. Trying to, Nathan replied. But not for optics. Not this time. I know. He looked at her. You've been quiet since we found the letter. Claire took a breath. It brought up a lot. Not just about you. About me, too. I've spent so much time being reactive, to the business, to your choices, to the pace of everything, I stopped asking what I really wanted from all of this. Nathan waited. Claire continued, When we started CLS, I felt like a co-architect. Somewhere along the way, I became a consultant. I want to change that. Nathan leaned forward slightly. What are you thinking? I want to lead something again. Not as your proxy. Not under Lucas. My own division. Something meaningful. Nathan's eyes met hers. What do you want to build? She hesitated for just a second, then answered. A community initiative. Something outside the commercial model. Free, open-access educational resources for underserved schools. Real content, not watered-down demos. Real support. Nathan's response was immediate. Do it. Take what you need. People. Budget. Time. Claire blinked, surprised. That's it? I trust you. She exhaled, visibly moved by the simplicity of the moment. That means more than you know, she said. Back at the office, Nathan brought the idea to the leadership team during the Friday executive session. We've spent years building tools for schools that can afford them, he said. It's time we build something for the ones who can't. There were cautious looks. Some eyebrows raised. But no one objected. Lucas was the first to speak. What Claire's proposing, it's not charity. It's smart. Building credibility at the grassroots level? That's how we secure long-term relevance. Nathan nodded. Exactly. And it's how we remember why we're here. By the end of the meeting, the motion had passed. The new initiative would be launched as CLS Access, with Claire leading a dedicated team. Over the weekend, Nathan stayed off his laptop and spent most of Saturday working with Claire to map out the first stages of CLS Access. They turned the living room into a whiteboard studio, scribbling over sticky notes and giant sheets of butcher paper. They debated curriculum models, delivery mechanisms, mobile-first designs. They argued over language use, resource prioritization, and localization strategies. But they did it together. By Sunday night, the living room was a chaotic mess of diagrams and color-coded categories. Nathan stood over one of the sketches, arms crossed. We're actually doing this, he said. Claire smirked. Was there ever any doubt? Plenty. She looked at him. Still? He shook his head. No. Not anymore. And for the first time in years, they weren't just building a company. They were building something that felt like purpose again. The first day of CLS Access began not with a press release or a company-wide memo, but with a handwritten welcome note placed on the desks of each member of the new team Claire had assembled. The notes were simple, but they carried a message few in the tech-driven world of education had come to expect: you are not just here to build. You are here to listen. Claire walked through the small, dedicated workspace with quiet confidence. The team included developers, educators, designers, and a social worker with experience in district outreach. They came from different departments and backgrounds, and some were new hires brought in specifically for the initiative. What united them was their shared desire to do something that mattered beyond margins. Meanwhile, Nathan was reshaping other corners of the company. He had convened a new internal council, cross-departmental and non-hierarchical, tasked not with approval or oversight, but with cultural alignment. Their job was to observe the company's environment and recommend changes to internal policies, language, rituals, even workspace layouts. On a Wednesday afternoon, the first of these recommendations landed on Nathan's desk. Reduce internal presentation slides by half. Encourage dialogue, not decks. Open feedback channels across titles. Anonymous is fine. Accessible is better. Create a no-catch-up zone, meetings that don't require pretense or perfection. Just progress. Nathan read each line carefully and marked the memo, approved. The change was already visible. At lunch, more teams were mixing. Executives no longer huddled around the same tables. Engineers and content strategists were co-hosting learning labs. One spontaneous idea, lunch without labels, was initiated by the product team and took off instantly. Employees wore plain name tags with only their first names, stripped of titles. The goal: to talk like people first. During one of these informal sessions, Nathan sat beside a junior data analyst named Priya. She was explaining her work on dropout prediction algorithms for school partners when she paused mid-sentence. "I'm sorry," she said. "I can't believe I'm explaining this to you." Nathan smiled. "If I ever stop wanting to learn how people here think, I've stayed too long." Word of this cultural shift started to spread outside the company. CLS began receiving requests from other edtech firms, nonprofits, and even a few school districts, not for products, but for collaboration. They wanted to learn how the internal changes were influencing external outcomes. Claire suggested documenting the evolution. Within weeks, a team from the branding and editorial departments began producing a short-form documentary series titled Rewriting the System. Each episode featured different voices from inside CLS, focusing on how their personal values now aligned with their professional work. Nathan declined to be in the first episodes. "Let the culture speak first," he told them. But it wasn't all smooth. Midway through the quarter, a long-standing department lead resigned, citing discomfort with the company's loss of traditional structure. He wasn't hostile, just honest. "I respect what you're doing," he told Nathan during their exit conversation. But not everyone thrives in ambiguity. Nathan thanked him for his service and held a brief all-staff forum that afternoon. "I want to be clear," Nathan said, standing without slides, "this isn't a free-for-all. Clarity is not the enemy of freedom. But we're redefining clarity to include context, purpose, and humanity, not just deadlines and data." The message landed. Even those who were uncertain began to understand that change didn't mean chaos. As CLS Access advanced, the team launched its first open-source module for middle school STEM educators, featuring content adapted for both urban and rural classroom challenges. Instead of pushing it through marketing, they released it quietly on a new site, no sign-ups, no lead capture forms. Just a download button and a short note. "If it helps you, it's yours." Within 2 weeks, the download numbers exceeded expectations. Claire received emails from teachers in Montana, Louisiana, and Northern California, some with praise, others with suggestions, all with gratitude. Lucas, too, had shifted. The Horizon team now participated in collaborative review sessions with other departments. Where there had once been defensiveness, there was now a careful curiosity. In one meeting, he even stopped mid-pitch and said, "Actually, let's hear from QA before I keep talking," eliciting a surprised glance from one of his own engineers. Nathan, watching from the back of the room, said nothing. He didn't need to. One morning, as he reviewed his schedule, Marina entered with a coffee and a smile. "You're going to like this one," she said, handing him a printed request. It was a formal invitation from a national education policy group to join a closed roundtable on ethical AI in learning environments. They wanted his voice, not just as a business leader, but as someone who had experienced internal ethical failure and correction. Nathan accepted immediately. At the same time, Claire was deep in planning for the next phase of CLS Access, a mobile platform designed specifically for communities with unstable internet connections. She was working with an infrastructure nonprofit to ensure offline capability and asynchronous data sync. When she presented the roadmap to Nathan in their shared project room, he took a moment before responding. "This," he said, "might be bigger than anything else we've ever done." Claire nodded. "Because it's not about what we're building. It's about who we're building it for." The words stuck with him. At the next company-wide meeting, Nathan stood in front of the entire CLS team, not as a distant executive, but as one among many, and gave the shortest speech he'd ever written. "We started this company to change how students learn," he said. "Now we're changing how we work so we can be worthy of that goal." Then he stepped aside, and the meeting continued, led not by him, but by rotating staff members sharing real stories of growth, failure, and adjustment. By the time the meeting ended, no one rushed out. They lingered, talked, stayed. Something had changed. CLS was no longer just a company that built educational tools. It had become an educational culture itself, one that taught, learned, listened, and led. Autumn arrived slowly in Palo Alto, bringing cooler mornings and a shift in pace across the CLS headquarters. It had been nearly 2 months since Horizon was integrated and CLS Access was launched, and while the excitement of reinvention had begun to settle, its effects had taken root in deeper ways. Nathan found himself stepping into fewer meetings but having more meaningful conversations. The internal systems were running smoother, not because people were working harder, but because they were working with greater clarity. There was less urgency and more intent. The team understood the direction, and more importantly, they understood why it mattered. One Monday morning, Nathan stood in one of the upper-floor lounges, a mug of coffee in hand, listening to a small group of interns discussing their experience with the new mentorship model launched through Claire's outreach division. He didn't interrupt. He just observed. One of them, a young woman from Bakersfield named Taryn, was explaining how her high school had never had access to digital classroom tools until CLS Access provided them with a trial curriculum. Another intern, whose parents had immigrated from El Salvador, nodded and added how his younger sister was now using that same module to prepare for STEM college entry exams. Nathan quietly stepped away before they noticed him. Later that day, he met with Claire in a conference room overlooking the campus courtyard. She had just returned from a regional roundtable with public school administrators in Sacramento, where she had presented the next iteration of CLS Access, Community Resource Hubs. These wouldn't be tech centers, she explained, sliding her tablet across the table. They'd be hybrid spaces. Offline libraries, mentorship meetups, mobile kiosks. Each one customized for the region. Nathan studied the prototype maps. You're building infrastructure. We're reconnecting people to access, Claire corrected. Tech is just the skeleton. This is the soul. Nathan looked up. Do you want this to stay under CLS, or become something larger? Claire considered. It should stay with CLS for now. But not as a side project. As part of the core. Then we'll restructure, he said. Let's draft the proposal together. Meanwhile, Horizon was transitioning from launch phase to long-term iteration. Lucas had organized a quarterly lab showcase, where internal teams could present not just polished updates, but early ideas, half-built, uncertain, creative. The first session featured a gamified learning framework for neurodiverse students and a predictive model for multilingual support in K-8 classrooms. Nathan attended the showcase, sitting in the audience alongside new hires and junior staff. During the feedback round, he asked a single question: what's one thing you're unsure about in your model? The room went still for a moment, but the presenters answered honestly. They didn't try to defend. They explored. It was the kind of cultural maturity Nathan had hoped to see, and it was beginning to take shape. That night, as he prepared a quiet dinner at home, Nathan received a call from Harold Evans. I read the write-up in the Chronicle, Harold said. Seems CLS is turning into something closer to an ecosystem. We're trying, Nathan replied. They say culture is what people do when no one's watching, Harold mused. Sounds like your people are doing the right things even when the spotlight's gone. Nathan smiled slightly. That might be the greatest compliment we've earned. During the next executive session, Nathan presented the proposed internal reorganization. CLS would formally transition from a product-centric company into a platform-driven educational network. Horizon would become the innovation wing, CLS Access would become the community development wing, and both would feed into the central CLS ecosystem, unified, but specialized. Departments are no longer silos, he told the group. They're lenses. And our goal isn't just scale. It's connection. Every initiative needs to show how it connects to the broader mission, to make learning accessible, meaningful, and human. There were questions, of course. Budget redistribution, team transitions, leadership overlap. But there was no resistance. The leadership had evolved, and so had their understanding of their roles. At home, Nathan and Claire had found a new rhythm. They no longer avoided conversations about the past. They addressed them without blame, acknowledging how ambition had slowly crowded out alignment. But those conversations had stopped feeling like post-mortems. They felt more like recalibrations, honest, quiet, sometimes difficult, but always forward-facing. One evening, Claire walked into Nathan's study and held up a small framed photo she had found while clearing out an old closet. It was a picture from the company's third month: Nathan, Claire, and a younger Lucas, sitting on mismatched chairs, surrounded by half-assembled desks, boxes of cables, and whiteboards crammed with ideas. "I think we were happier when things were messy, she said. Nathan took the frame from her. "We were closer to the ground. Maybe we need to stay closer." He looked at her. "We're doing that now." She nodded. "We are." The next day, Claire presented the first full-year impact report from CLS Access to the board. It was modest in size, just under 20 pages, but it was detailed and deeply personal. Testimonials, field notes, regional statistics, and a roadmap for scaling without compromising community relationships. One board member remarked, "This isn't just innovation. This is restoration." After the meeting, as they walked back through the office halls, Nathan said to her, "We need to host something." Claire glanced at him. "A gala?" "No," he said. "Something internal. Intimate. Just us and the people who got us here. 10 years. Let's celebrate with the ones who never needed a headline to believe." And so, they began planning the 10-year anniversary gathering, not a flashy affair, but a reflection of the new CLS culture: storytelling circles, live demo pods, local student performances, and shared meals. No stages, no long speeches. Just presence. As the date neared, Nathan found himself walking through the office differently. Not as an overseer. Not even as a founder. But as a listener. And the company responded in kind. The reconstruction wasn't complete. But it was no longer just recovery. It was becoming renewal. The 10th anniversary of Carter Learning Systems arrived without fanfare, but not without meaning. The invitation, sent only internally, carried a single line beneath the date and location: "Let's remember where we came from." No theme, no branding, no corporate slogans. Just the suggestion of something honest, grounded, reflective, and human. The event was held in the same building where the company had started, now used only for training and archival storage. Over the past week, Claire had quietly led a team to transform it. The old rooms were left mostly intact, but now each one held a part of the CLS story: handwritten business plans pinned beside present-day design blueprints, clips from early software versions playing next to their latest builds, and wall-sized timelines that included not just milestones, but moments of failure and redefinition. Nathan arrived early, walking through the exhibit alone before anyone else arrived. In one of the back rooms, he found a whiteboard preserved with faded marker lines, his original user journey maps for their first product, drawn over a decade ago. Next to it, someone had taped a recent photo of a student in rural Arizona using the current platform. The contrast was stark. The thread connecting them, unmistakable. By mid-morning, employees began filtering in. There was no agenda. No formal program. Just food, music from local student musicians, and open spaces designed for conversation. Tables were set with blank cards that simply read, "Write one lesson you'll never forget." People did. Some left them tucked into bookshelves. Others pinned them to boards. One read, "Leadership is more about listening than guiding." Another, "It's okay to pause. That's where clarity lives." And another, written in a careful, slightly shaky hand, "My grandson uses CLS Access. I joined this company so he'd know he mattered." Nathan moved through the room slowly, stopping to greet people, accepting hugs, smiles, quiet nods. There was no rush. No expectation. He wasn't performing. He was present. In one corner, he found Lucas talking with a small group of developers, laughing about how he used to code entire modules without telling anyone until the last minute. The developers teased him gently. Lucas took it in stride. They caught eyes across the room. Nathan approached. "Did you see the photo in the archive room?" Lucas asked. I did, Nathan replied. Hard to believe it was ever that simple. Sometimes simple was harder, Lucas said. Fewer resources. More risk. And now? Now we carry the weight differently, he said. But it's still worth it. Nathan nodded. You've changed. Lucas smiled. So have you. They shook hands, not stiffly, but sincerely. There was no apology left to give. Only the understanding that rebuilding trust wasn't about erasing what happened. It was about standing on it. Later, Claire found Nathan sitting on the back steps of the building, where the soft noise of the gathering faded into a warm silence. She sat beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee from the volunteer barista stand. You okay? She asked. He took the cup. Better than okay. She smiled. You've been quiet today. I think that's the point. Claire looked out toward the trees lining the edge of the property. Do you remember that first week? We barely had chairs. We used empty moving boxes for desks, Nathan said. I forgot how often we improvised. She turned to him. We should do that more often. Not the boxes, but the improvising. We've got the structure now, he said. Maybe that gives us room to bend again. They sat in silence for a while, sipping their coffee, watching the shadows move across the courtyard. As the afternoon wound down, employees began writing notes on a shared wall, simple messages to mark the moment. Someone had scrawled in thick black marker, "We made it. Together." Nathan stood before it later that evening, reading each line. No one had asked them to do it. No one was instructed to contribute. Yet the wall was nearly full. He picked up a pen and, near the bottom corner, added his own. This was never about building a company. It was about remembering what learning can feel like, when it's alive. As the evening drew to a close, lights dimmed and people began saying goodbyes, lingering as if reluctant to leave something that felt more like a memory than an event. Claire stood by the exit, hugging each person as they left, listening to their stories, their laughter, their quiet gratitude. Nathan watched for a moment before stepping outside. The air was cool, and the sky was clear. For the first time in years, he felt still, not because everything was resolved, but because it no longer needed to be perfect. He looked up, remembering the early mornings, the late nights, the countless versions of himself that had walked these roads. And he understood, finally, that none of it had been wasted. Not the missteps. Not the near breakdowns. Not even the silence. Because all of it had led here, to a company not just rebuilt, but reimagined. To relationships not just repaired, but redefined. And to a purpose that no longer needed to be found, because it had grown with them, matured through the strain, and now stood rooted in something unshakable. As he stepped into his car, Nathan glanced one last time at the building in the rearview mirror. He smiled. Not because the journey was over. But because, finally, he could continue it in peace.